Good afternoon, everyone. We have some public hearings to deal with this afternoon before we open the regular session of our September 22nd meeting. There are 3 or 4. And today's public hearings are convened under the provisions of British Columbia Local Government Act to hear submissions relative to proposed bylaws 2778, 2780, 2781, and 2785. Public hearings are the public's opportunity to make representations to the board. All persons who believe that their interest in property is affected by the proposed laws shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaws. I would ask those members of the public who wish to speak to kindly commence your address by clearly stating your name. The board will not debate matters of a proposed bylaw with individual citizens, but directors may ask you questions following your presentation. This public hearing is to listen to your views. Thus, no one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views heard. I will call each of the bylaws individually and complete each hearing in turn. We'll begin with Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2778 to amend Zoning Bylaw 2400 by rezoning a portion of 5580 Adams West Forest Service Road from RL1 to to C4 recreational commercial, including a site-specific provision to enable resort development, including new rentable units, continued use of the RV park, and 2 caretaker units. Madam Madam Corporate Officer, are there any written submissions?
There are no written submissions, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this matter in person or via Zoom?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Blackwell. I am an owner of Marnie's Bay, and I'm happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to speak and just advocate for our resort and just tell you a little bit about ourselves and my family. I'm going to just chat, briefly about the rezoning application. We are not proposing any new density. Or how do we get it to go to the next slide? This one? There we go. We're not proposing any new density. It's just a realignment of the boundary of our resort, but I want to touch on that. I wanted to share a little bit about my family and my history with the area. We were in front of the TNRD in the local community almost a year ago, so some of the board members wouldn't have had an opportunity to hear our presentation, so I wanted to chat about that. I'll talk a little bit about some of the feasibility and engineering that we've done. And I want to emphasize some of the consultation and public engagement that we've done along the way, because I think that's crucial for this type of a project. This is just an aerial view. The purple boundary sort of to the north shows our existing resort and some roads and some infrastructure. And this purple area just shows the realigned property boundary and the realigned zoning. Like I said, there's no new density, just a changed boundary. For those of you not familiar with Adams Lake is a large lake, 61 kilometers long, general use lake. And we have one of the very few resorts on the property with significant demand. We've got more demand than we know what to do with. I get emails every day about people looking to come and enjoy Adams Lake. And so we're hoping to help people do that. I acquired the resort from my uncle, along with my aunt. So we've decided to keep it in the family. It was started in 2006, and we're currently zoned for seasonal cabins and an RV resort. And we have an existing marina and private boat launch. Like I said, our current zoning is for already 100 units, 2 caretaker dwellings, and a maximum of 50 RV sites. The proposed zoning doesn't change that. We've just extended the boundary of the resort to the adjacent property that we acquired last year. It's a de-densification and we think results in a much better overall land use. Just a little bit about my family. My family's been on Adams Lake. It's a pretty important area to me and my family. My grandmother was born on Adams Lake. My grandparents arrived on the property that's subject to this application in 1946 and lived in a one-room cabin and raised 4 kids. It was called Abert's Bay at the time. It's now been renamed Marnie's Bay after my grandmother, Marnie. They raised 9 children in Brennan Creek. I won't list them all. And then in 1948, they moved a few kilometers north up the lake and established the local community of Brennan Creek. And community is pretty important to our family, and it was initiatives of folks like my grandfather to come and build a school and try to build a lifestyle and allow people to come and enjoy the lake, as well as providing economic opportunities and employment to people in the region. This is a picture of my grandparents on Marnie's Bay sometime in the 40s or 50s. This is the cabin that they lived in when they first arrived on the property.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it hasn't survived, but it's a nice picture. And this is Marnie's Bay with a couple of horses. My grandfather started his logging company with 2 horses and a Swede saw. They now run 4 conventional logging operations, high lead operation, road building operation, and a trucking company. So that's where it all started, a couple of horses, and lots has changed. My grandfather, Mac, community was essential. If he didn't build a community, he couldn't get people to come and work for him, right? He had to find a way to attract families to come to the area so that, he could have workers and that, his kids could be able to go to school and have other kids to play with. And so they ended up building a school, the Brennan Creek School on Adams Lake in the 50s. It's where my little sister went to school. My mother went to school, and the kids that live out there still take the bus from Brennan Creek into Barrier almost every day. Unfortunately, the Brennan Creek School was torn down a couple of years ago. This is our local community hall. And this is a picture of the resort from the marina as it stands right now. That's a bit about my family. I want to just chat a little bit about the feasibility and engineering. Obviously, because we're not proposing any new density, most of our feasibility and engineering studies, while we had to apply them to the neighboring property, nothing major has changed. We're not increasing any new water demand, any additional septic demand. Our wildfire reports actually and mitigation risk has actually gotten quite a bit better by the fact that we now acquired more property and we're able to manage the risk a lot better than we were before. And we built some fire guards around the property. Water system was already engineered feasible for the size of our resort, so there was no changing there or to the on-site sewage requirements. And traffic, we spent quite a bit of time when we originally zoned the property talking about traffic, and I'll talk a little bit more of that again, but again, no additional density. One of the big things I want to talk about is, the public engagement and consultation. So when we originally rezoned the property to the existing density we have now, we had an in-community public hearing where we got to hear the views and perspectives of lots of different folks. And we spent quite a bit of time working with Interfor, which is the local logging company, about what their perspectives were and what their interest in the area was. And of course, they had some concerns, and we worked closely with them both before the hearing, but even after we successfully rezoned the property, we continued to work with Interfor to implement the ideas that we had and the ideas we talked about to make sure that the roads were safe. And so we got to a point where Interfor was satisfied with the measures we had taken to promote safety, which includes signage. You see, these signs exist at our property. We have road signs advising people of our access routes, and we require all of our occupants to use and know how to use and use road radios while they're traveling the road. So lots of work with Interfor, which was good. Interfor also, during that process, expressed some support for the project as well, in terms of, in order to keep communities and industries in rural logging areas alive, requires people to invest and to build and have opportunities, cabins, places for people to come stay, whether it's seasonally or not, is good for their business as well. They help attract employees, attract workers, and it helps the contractors. I don't know if anyone's following the logging industry right now. It's in a bit of a curtailment. So it's important that we all, not just the logging companies in the area, we all invest in the community. I also want to just talk a little bit about some of the consultation we did with the Adams Lake Indian Band. So before our original rezoning, we had actually been meeting with the Adams Lake Indian Band to get their perspective on things and to see what they had to say about the project. After our rezoning application last year, we continued those discussions. It actually culminated in us signing an agreement with the Adams Lake Indian Band where they've consented to our project. And we've built a really strong relationship with them. You know, obviously we've agreed with them, you know, but between ourselves that, you know, they could come and do some archaeological assessments, which they've done, hasn't identified anything material to date, but even throughout and during the project, we've agreed to let them come on our property and check things out. If there's any excavations, if they want to come and take a look, they can come and see that. I don't, you know very many developments where the applicant has gone and, you know, reached out directly with the local First Nations, but I think it's important. I want to say how fruitful that has been. It's been an excellent relationship. They've recently acquired a community campsite in Brennan Creek on Adams Lake. And much of that was our involvement where we helped with that, help them meet with our community to build relationships with the people of Brennan Creek so that they can establish a greater presence and enjoy the lake as well for their own cultural practices. So that's just been a really excellent thing that's come out of this whole process. And then, you know, Interfor, Adams Lake Indian Band, also the local community of Brennan Creek. I talked a little bit about it. We appreciate, the community of Brennan Creek appreciates how important it is to invest in our communities to keep them alive, especially in rural British Columbia. So, you know, the future sustainability of our community is important, and it requires people to invest and for projects like this to move forward. So that's really all I have to say. Just wanted to introduce myself, my family, and tell you a little bit about our existing resort on Adams Lake. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Blackwell. Don't run away from there. In case someone has questions for you. Does anyone have a question for Mr. Blackwell, starting with Director Rothenberger and then Director Stamer?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was on the public hearing panel, you might call, for the original application up in the area there. And this was not part of it. And I think the report explains it, but I just want to be clear. So at the time of the original application, this property was not available, or you were in the process of purchasing it, but it was too late to include. So now that's the deal is closed and you have the property, and now you just want to add that kind of to the original plan. So it's just to spread out the original
Same amount of density.
siting for the cabins and so on.
Exactly. It's a better land use plan. It's going to spread those cabins out over a larger area. It'll have less interference with my existing RV sites. So that's you've explained it perfectly. Same number of cabins, larger area.
Okay, thanks.
Director Stamer?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, to Mike, I was with Directors Rothenberger and Kershaw as well at our original zoning meeting. Have you finalized your plan on the square footage of those cabins that you are going to be building?
Not final, but we have a range, and it's dictated by typically septic demands. So interior health requires a certain amount of septic per cabin. So if the bigger the cabin, the more septic you use, so it limits how big they are. We don't plan for anything. We think maximum 2,000 square feet, but 1,500 square feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. Some will be even smaller. It just, yeah, we haven't got that far necessarily.
Director Stamer?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, if we're going to be 2,000 square feet, that's really not a cabin. That's almost a house.
Well,
I mean, it can be,
Yeah.
I mean, you can use it for whatever you want to use it, but now it's not like 30 by 30. I mean, it's a fairly good size.
that'd be the maximum size that you could probably support. We'll have a range of sizes. I don't have anything set. It depends on, if you've seen construction costs and other budgetary constraints. I don't have a 100% clear picture on how big they're going to be at this point.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Rice.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. It's not often we get a presentation where they've done all their homework and completed almost all their assignments and did relation building with First Nations, and I want to applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Mr. Blackwell? Seeing none, I will thank you for a very thorough and well done presentation, and obviously, as Director Rice said, you certainly did your homework long before you got here. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
That takes us, oh, pardon me. Are there any further people who wish to speak to this matter? For the second time, are there any people who wish to speak to this matter of bylaw 2778? And for the third time, is there anyone present or on Zoom who wishes to speak to bylaw 2778? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed. That takes us to temporary use permit bylaw 2780. And this bylaw enables a short-term vacation rental within an existing single-family dwelling at 7360 Cahilty Crescent in Whitecroft for a term of up to 3 years. These specific temporary use conditions are stipulated in the proposed permit and would form a part of bylaw 2780. Madam Corporate Officer, are there any written submissions?
Yes, there are, Mr. Chair. The board would have seen the update to your agendas yesterday. There were 6 pieces of correspondence that were received for this application.
And they've all been provided to the board.
They have.
Thank you. So is there anyone wishing to speak to bylaw 2780? A couple of people.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. We are Kathy and Tim Shear, and we bought this property in February. Our daughter's property is right beside, and the opportunity came up that it was for sale. And we're looking at retiring shortly, so we took the opportunity and we bought this property. We were looking at maybe renting it out in order to cover our costs. And looking forward to using it when we do come out. We still have a daughter that's in Ontario. I think everything, I don't really have anything to add to what has already been submitted. So if there's any questions.
Thank you. Director Rothenberger.
Thank you. What's short-term rental? Is it 30 days, up to 30 days?
Under 30 days or.
Yeah, and what's your expectation? I don't think it's required that you state it, but what is your expectation as to the average period of time for a rental? Is it like a week or a couple of
I would
days or a month or
Well, we would,
Minimum would be a week, we
Yeah.
believe.
about a week? Did you say?
at a time.
That's kind of the average. that-
Hoping that. We've never done this before, so we're not sure what the
Okay,
chances even are.
thank you.
Director Schaefer.
Are you going to live there or are you just renting it out?
Not just renting it out. We are planning on living there for a good, like a portion of the year. Maybe 50%. We're not 100% sure, but it's just to be used in the time so that we won't be there.
Are there any other questions for the Director Stamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to mention that I appreciate the house rules that you've put in here. That's refreshing to see. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Director Brown.
Did I hear you say you had a daughter on the property or a daughter in Ontario?
We have a daughter in Ontario, but we have a daughter that owns the property right beside the one
Okay,
in Whitecroft.
2 different ones, not the same one. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, I'll thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to bylaw 2780? Yes, please come forward.
So my name is Penny Erickson and I live up on Kilty Crescent, just down the street from the proposed top application. And so I don't know, has everybody read the written submission? Yeah, so our concerns are really more to the issue with nightly rentals and being able to control any issues that surround that. We are in a very, very small community, one basic crescent, and it's really very, very difficult to ever get any assistance should something go zigzag. And I appreciate it. Welcome to our community. And I know their daughter very well. And I think that the intent always of a nightly or short-term rental is that the people coming onto your property would have the same values, morals, respect of the property as you do as a house owner. And it's not, unfortunately, always the case. And enforcement of any rules or house rules can become very, very difficult. Again, when we're looking at tourists coming into a neighborhood versus where we have Sun Peaks right above us that can accommodate all of the issues that surround having tourism and tourists within their neighborhood, they are a little bit better equipped than we are. We have no amenities. We have, like even yesterday, we had 2 outages of power. So you have no Wi-Fi, you have no power. And if it goes on for a long period of time, we have other issues that come up. In the wintertime, which is where we get a lot of our tourists coming into our area, especially for the nightly rentals. Of course, we've got other issues around the road. And we are often closed both directions. We often can't go up the hill or down the hill. So again, we're sort of stuck in our community and have to have the amenities in order to deal with those kind of issues. I think one of our biggest things that we wrote was we're very concerned right now because our whole area depends on staffing and having housing available to people that are coming to work for the resort and keep it open for tourists. So already there's a shortage. And unfortunately, even this morning, there was 4 people. Anybody need a snowboard in here? Some people are trying to figure out ways to get rental and housing so that they can continue to work at Sun Peaks. And we're losing people continuously. They're moving out of the area because they can't find housing, or they are not coming to the area because they cannot find housing. So I think if the Shears are looking at using their property 50% of the time, that's one, it's a plus for them because they can have some income when they are not here. But it's the enforcement that I really, really wonder about, and whether or not you can enforce rules for your tourists that are coming in when we have no amenities to help them. So is there any questions?
Thank you. Are there any further representations with respect to this bylaw? Yes, please come forward.
My name is Andrea Nielsen, and I also live in Whitecroft on 7320 Kahilty Crescent. And I would like to also welcome our new neighbors to haven't met yet. I have basically the personal and business reasons why I do not support the application for the TUPS. So personal wise, my husband and I, we used to live up at Sun Peaks for about 15 plus years. And we lived in two different condo sites where there were lots of short-term rentals, creating lots of noises and party noises, etc., etc. So we decided to have it more quiet, and we decided to build our own house on Mountain View Drive. A few years later, that development also started to do vacation home rentals. So basically we got into the noises again, into parties, neighbor complained. And for us then, we pulled the plug privately and said, we're gonna go and move into a more quiet neighborhood, meaning Whitecraft, a quaint little community. And we bought 5 years ago, and we're just loving it down there. It's just the place where retirees, young families live, and you don't really have to deal with short-term rentals and noises, which we really appreciate. On the other hand, I am doing business up at Sun Peaks, and I've been doing that for about 15 years now, and that's property services that I do. I used to manage vacation homes, and we had to get them ready for the next renters. So it was basically, there were party houses, and no matter where, I had 5 houses that I looked after. And I would say 70% of the rentals were quite messy, that we had to clean up the next morning, the morning after. So from that point of view, I'm really, I'm not a supporter of vacation homes. So I basically pulled the plug on the homes, which I do no longer look after, and I now do just condominiums only, which apparently are a little bit of a different scenario. In a vacation home, you can have like up to 2 or 3 or 4 people, families that split the rent and rent the place out. And there's nothing really you can do in the neighborhood. So there is the noises, and people are sitting in hot tubs, and they are sometimes way in the early morning. And even if you call one of the rental companies and complain, there's nothing really that happens. And Whitecraft also does not have a patrolling bylaw officer, which Sun Peaks does. So in that regard, who really controls the noises? So, and then what Penny already mentioned previously, that there is a major housing crisis up at Sun Peaks, major. Like, you go on the Survivor Facebook side of Sun Peaks, and there's people continuously looking for places to stay. They have secure jobs, they just cannot find any accommodation. So for any long-term rentals, so perhaps that might be reconsidered. I think people would really welcome that, rather than adding short-term rentals into the community. Yeah, so this is all what I was going to say from my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any further representations with respect to the Cahelty Road bylaw? Seeing none, no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. We will be dealing with that further down the agenda, by the way, okay. That takes us to zoning amendment bylaw number 2781, which would amend zoning bylaw 2400 by rezoning a crown leasehold at Hathium Lake, BC, legally described as District Lot 1627 KDYD from RL1 rural zone to LA1 limited access cabin zone to facilitate code compliance of an existing dry cabin and accessory buildings. Madam Corporate Secretary, are there any written submissions?
No written submissions.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this matter, either in person or via Zoom?
Chair Gillis, there is an individual on Zoom that would like to address the board on this.
Is she, are we muted or?
Hello there. My name is Ilva Bivakwa, and my husband and I had purchased the lease of this parcel of Crown land, and I hadn't prepared anything specific, but I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Ms. Bivakwa? I don't see any, Ms. Bivakwa, but thank you for making yourself available.
Thank you.
Are there any further representations with respect to bylaw 2781? For the second time, Are there any further representations with respect to bylaw 2781? And for the third and final time, does anyone wish to speak to bylaw 2781? I'm seeing none. There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. And finally, for public hearings, we're now at zoning amendment bylaw 2785, which would amend zoning bylaw 2400 by adding a site-specific use to 272 Holloway Drive in Tobiano to allow a secondary suite within a new dwelling on the property. Madam Corporate Secretary, are there any written submissions?
There are no written submissions.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this matter in person or via Zoom? For the second time, is there anyone who wishes to speak to this matter either in person or via Zoom? And for the third and final time, is there anyone who wishes to speak to this matter, zoning amendment bylaw 2785, either in person or via Zoom? I'm seeing none. There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed and thank everybody for your appearance and for your input and for answering the questions that were posed to you. Given that, I will call to order the September 22nd meeting of the Board of Directors of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. And I will start with Chair's announcements. And welcome you to our September 22nd, 2022 meeting. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located on the Tecumseh territory, situated within the ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership we have with Tecumseh and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Today is the second last regular meeting of our current term, and I know staff have been working diligently to prepare for the upcoming general election, October the 15th, and they aren't the only ones. These last 4 years have flown by, but they haven't been without their trials, that's for certain. The Thompson-Nicola Regional Library is changing its tune and is excited to introduce its first musician in residence, acclaimed songwriter and Tecumseh band member, Jeremy Nishaw, who will mentor musicians through one-on-one coaching sessions and will be delivering programs for residents across the regional district. And if you wish more information on this, please consult the library's website at tnrl.ca. There's a reminder to the board to submit any travel claims or communication expenses for this year as soon as possible, because Finance Department requires the detailed invoices or receipts for the associated communications costs for each month being claimed. And for travel, a list of trips with destination and purpose of the travel with associated kilometers claimed for each trip. In terms of upcoming meetings and events, October the 5th, we have a Utility Services Committee meeting. October the 5th, we have a Regional Solid Waste Management Committee meeting. And October the 6th, we have a regular board meeting. October the 15th, I imagine everybody knows, we have a local government general election. Today in your blue folders, you will find any mail that is addressed to you personally. And nothing else that I could find in my blue folder. Are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? I'm seeing none. That would bring us to the minutes of the regular board meeting from August the 18th, 2022.
So moved.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Bylaws from public hearing, second and third reading, starting with bylaw number 2778.
Move recommendation number 1.
Is there any discussion? Director Stamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not against this proposal. I just want a little bit of clarity from staff. Again, it goes back to my original question to one of the developers in the size of the units or the homes they're going to be putting on this, because if they're going to start putting houses on there, it's going to change the original intent of what this resort was going to be, regardless of the fact of whether they increase the size twice as big as what was originally there. So can Mrs. Savolkova tell me what the maximum size of homes or cabins that they could build on this property?
Can you help us with that, Mrs. Dulkova?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I can't turn on my video because I'm locked out. Oh, can I do it now? No, I'm locked out. So, but I can see you and you can hear me. So we do not, there is an ability under legislation for local government to set a maximum and a minimum size of a dwelling or a building or cabin. But we do not do that in our bylaw, and we have not done that in the past. In this, other than by covenant, I believe, in cases where there is on-site limitations to sewage management and septic field. In a case like this, as the applicant had relayed, there is an overall limit in capacity of the system, but there's nothing in the current bylaw to limit the size, and there's also nothing in the current bylaw to limit whether it's a cabin or a permanent dwelling.
Thanks, Mrs. Dulkova. Does that answer your question, Director Stamer?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just as a follow-up, would the developer have the ability to put in a sewer system if they so choose? And in other words, increase that size of square footage and density?
Yes, the developer could do that. There's nothing in zoning that forecloses that. Under the official community plan, they may need an addendum or a new development permit to ensure that the water protection in the lake of any surface water, groundwater, or lake water protection.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 1? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion respecting recommendation number 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Brings us to temporary use and I just got my nose fixed and now my mouth is busted. Temporary use permit number TUP 61, bylaw 2780. That's the Kahilty Crescent.
Move to deny.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, may I?
Just a second. Sorry, Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't be supporting motion that Director Rothenberger put forward. I would like to commend the applicant for A, making an application, but also B, coming here today. When I look what was presented in the report, there being, I believe it was 12 already short-term rentals, that they're just doing it and not asking. We have somebody that's coming with a set of rules that they put in place, and they're trying to keep it confined, as opposed to just taking a risk that they're not going to get in trouble. And that doesn't happen very often these days. And I do commend them for coming in, and I will not be supporting the motion as Director Rothenberger has presented. Thank you.
Director Stamer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with Director O'Reilly in as much as that I totally support what he has to say. And I know there's going to be challenges with going from a short-term rental to the full rental. And I know one of the challenges is with the Tenancy Act. And I know that it would be great to be able to have a short-term rental that you could just have somebody staying there on a constant basis. But because of the Tenancy Act, if they turn around and turn it into a rental, that causes a bunch of issues as well. And yes, I totally support what the community is saying about enforcement. That's another thing, that's another area that we should be looking at possibly. Maybe there's an opportunity to be working with Sun Peaks and their bylaw officer to be able to help out with some of these things, but I'm not supporting the motion either.
Thanks, Director Stammer. Director Rothenberger.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'm persuaded by the concerns of the residents, which we, from time to time have to pay attention to. This proposal does not assist the need for long-term rentals, particularly for Sun Peak staff, and Whitecroft is an important source of accommodation for them. It is not a tourist community. It's a small residential community. This is much different than the effect of B&Bs. It will set a precedent. There's no demonstrated need for it. There is a lack of availability for resources in the event of disturbances or problems of any kind. And I think we need to go with the residents on this one, and those basically are my reasons for opposing it. So I would ask for support to turn this down.
Thank you, Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I will not be supporting it also, not only for the reasons given, but I look at these neighbors and they get along well. They seem to like each other and know each other. And I would suggest that the concern for noise and maybe parties and stuff like that, I think that goes to the character of the people that are renting it out. And and you do have a choice of who gets to stay there ultimately. And I think it seems like there's a respect for the neighborhood with each other up there. It's not an issue of a Hatfield McCoy situation. It's how does it work best for a neighborhood? Whether they do it's turned down or approved, long-term rentals are not going to be impacted, in my opinion. I mean, they're not. If it's turned down today, it's not like suddenly they're going to turn it into a long-term rental. So you have no positive coming out of it turning it down. I would much rather see, and as it says in the letter and in the report, we could intervene at any time if the TUP requirements are not followed. We can step in and shut it down at any time. So I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to recommendation number 1?
If I may.
Yes.
Yep, Director Rain here. I can't go on the screen either, so well, maybe we can now. I see Director Graham. Yep, Graham has just popped up. We're now unlocked. Yeah, no, I had a number of points I was going to make, but listening to the other directors, I'm going to shorten what I had to say, but I would speak against the recommendation. I mean, Whitecroft is a vibrant family community outside of the hustle and bustle of Sun Peaks, and I think we do have to respect that STRs in Whitecroft are not consistent with the present land use. And I will tell you that we had a public meeting in Sun Peaks this week. Took about 2 hours, STRs, and nothing divides a community more than STRs and neighbors, and we're divided down the middle. Many of the property owners want to do short-term rentals because they see the potential dollar signs in it, and yet some of them operate very well. They manage to screen their guests. They do a good job, but others just drive a nuisance into the neighborhood. And on the online accommodation providers are very difficult. We have property that has a business license for 12 persons, but you can see advertisements all over online that say 23. And the reason when we say to them, look, you're only licensed for 12, but the advertising says up to 23 people, they say, well, they can't control that because Airbnb lists the maximum occupancy based on the beds that are available. So this is very, very difficult to control. And I would tell you that it's an area that I don't think DNRD wants to rush into. On the enforcement is absolutely critical in satisfying the neighbors and making sure that this will be well controlled. I mean, the benefit of this proposal is that they have relations living right next door, but it is a precedent that I think you would find more people around. And then my final comment would be, you know, on the whole enforcement side, you know, we had in the report that we see that there are short-term rentals in residential areas, including Whitecroft, that really are against our zoning bylaws. I mean, I personally think we need to show that we can enforce some of these things. If we know that there are illegal short-term rentals going on, we should be sending those people cease and desist letters and telling them that they should apply for a TUP. But I mean, just ignoring it shows the level of enforcement. And as one of the presenters pointed out, I mean, we have bylaw, but I can tell you that it's hard to find bylaw, because that bylaw has to be late at night, because the disturbances are usually late at night, and trying to fix up a disturbance a week later just gets into a he said, she said kind of issue. And I would say we should not support this at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Rain. Ms. Sadilkova.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to, our recommendation is in the report. I'm not going to repeat that. We did a 2-page addendum where we did further research, and it is correct as per Director O'Reilly. There are a dozen plus short-term rentals, none of which have temporary use permits and have never applied in the TNRD outside of Sun Peaks, within a 20-25 minute drive of Sun Peaks. Now, I did want to remind the board that we have enforced on short-term rentals at Red Lake, and we did go to court and we were successful and we got our costs back, and that was shut down. You have a board policy on enforcement of short-term rentals. We only enforce on complaint and nuisance. The board policy is not to enforce simply on complaint. We have to have an element of nuisance such as noise, a mess on and around the property, fire risk, or what have you. So that is absolutely how we have been enforcing short-term rentals across the TNRD. And at any given time, we probably have 2 or 3 files open on short-term rentals, enforcement files, but we have never had the file in and around Whitecroft and Heffley Lake. And my last quick point, I'm sorry for talking too much, is there is an ability, besides the manager living right next door, there's also an ability for the board to claw back a temporary use permit and to require a security. So if the board was to grant the TUP, they could request that security and then cancel it if it goes sideways or if there's complaints. I just want to make sure the board's aware of that option, regardless of how the vote ends up. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Sadilkova. Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Just on this question of precedent, I'm under the understanding that there's no precedent potentially set, because each individual case goes to a public hearing. We have to adjudicate it basically based on its merits. But am I missing something around, if we do this, for example, if we allow this, then that would certainly set some sort of like open door for other folks to sort of say it's kind of be allowed.
I don't know to whom you're addressing the
How about
question.
that,
I don't know that I'm qualified to
Director
answer
of
that.
Planning, actually?
Ms. Sadilkova.
Absolutely, there would be no precedent in that respect. And yes, this was the first application, somebody asking permission first. However, unless we got complaints, we are not going to pursue any of the other ones that are already operating without permission.
Yeah, and Mr. I always have trouble with the Director of Planning's last name, so I'm kind of a Director of Planning, but one day I'll get your last name correct after 7 years around the board table. I
Don't
apologize for
worry.
that. Thank you.
Ms. Sadilkova, when you say there, I'm compelled to disagree with you. You say there'd be no precedent. Clearly it establishes precedent. I assume that you're suggesting there'd be no legally binding precedent. Is that correct?
Yeah, pardon me, no legally binding precedent, and just if the board denies or approves this temporary use permit, that doesn't, a new application would be a whole new rodeo.
Thank you. Is there any further, Director Walsh?
Yeah, so I just wanted, so right now, there's nobody permitted to use single short-term occupancy in Whitecroft right now. So this would be the first, right? It's legal, it's authorized.
If this is approved, it would be the first one in Whitecroft to be authorized. Now, as per our little report addendum, our bylaw allows traditional bed and breakfasts just about everywhere. And they don't need a business license. The big difference is there's three big differences. One, a traditional bed and breakfast has a proprietor on site within the building, not next door. Two, in a traditional bed and breakfast, you cannot have kitchens and kitchenettes as part of the suite or the rental. You can have its own, your room can of course have its own bathroom. And three, in my entire 20 some odd years of bylaw enforcement, I have never gotten a complaint from the neighborhood anywhere about a traditional bed and breakfast. We certainly have acted on complaints about short-term rentals.
Can I
Thank you.
just ask?
Director Walsh?
What would be the amount of the security deposit that you mentioned that we could require?
There, it's entirely, there is no policy and there is no bylaw and there is no legislation that prescribes it. It would be up to the board. My only recommendation, for all the paperwork that we would be going through, it should be meaningful.
Thank you. Director Rothenberger.
Just a couple of final points. Strict code of conduct is good. It's admirable. It's very fine, but incredibly hard to enforce. And so we shouldn't be too persuaded by that. We should be more persuaded by the likelihood of issues and by the concerns of the residents. And secondly, we have a bit of a habit of saying when these types of things come up, if it doesn't work, we'll fix it later. I think that's kind of the wrong approach. We should be looking at it now as to what the concerns will be, not, well, let's go ahead and approve it and, you know, we'll fix it up later if something goes wrong. I don't think that's the way we should make decisions.
Thank you. And finally, Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to staff, what is the upside, or why would anybody wanting to do this come through this process? Given that there's 12 in this small area, why would they go through this? So those 12 haven't had complaints, haven't been shut down. Why would they do this other than it's the right thing to do? I just don't see the reason why. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the recommendation? I'm not seeing any. I'm compelled to agree with Director Rothenberger with respect to the enforcement of these rules. It's laudable that we have the rules presented, but I strongly suspect that they'd be almost impossible to enforce. Though I've struggled with this one. I really have, because I understand why the people would like to, why the applicants would like to recover some revenue from their property, but it occurs to me that once there's been a problem, the damage is already done. By the time the tenants are gone, and there's not much that the neighbors can do in any way at all to restore. The other thing is with respect to the clawback, and I would use the same argument in terms of the clawback. By the time we claw back the TUP, if we chose to do that at a later date, the damage, as I said, has already been done. I wrestled with this one for some time, and I too will be voting against approval. Is there any further discussion? See, Director Singh.
The motion is to deny, right? So you were voting in support of the motion. To deny, just remember, because people talk about how they're opposing. So but it's, the motion is to deny, right? Okay, correct. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, Director Rothenberger.
The motion is not on the recommendations. The motion is to deny the application. So, yeah, so.
Okay, well, I'll be
support the
voting in
motion.
favor of the motion in that case. Thank you for straightening me out on that. Okay, is there no further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Oh dear. 1, 2.
Chair Gillis, would you mind if we did a poll of all the directors' names for the benefit of the recording secretary? So all those in favor, if they could raise their hands and I'll go through. So all in favor? So Director Rothenberger, Director Crow, Chair Gillis, Vice Chair Kershaw, Director Smith, Director Christian, Director Quinn, Director Walsh, Director Blackwell, Director Schaefer. On the screen, we have Director Graham, Director Talarico, and Director Rain in favor. How many? It's 13.
Say those opposed.
Opposed, we have Director O'Reilly, Director Brown, Director Polterman, Director Singh, Director Stamer, Director Bass, Director Laird, Director Watson, Director Duty, Director Swan, Director Rice, Director Elliott. Oh, oh, sorry, Vice Chair Roden. I said Vice Chair Kershaw. Sorry about that. Vice Chair Roden. Who are we missing? Who are we missing? We might have to do it again. Might have to do that again. Who are we missing? Gotta be someone. You were in favor?
Right.
You were in favor. She was in favor.
Director,
Is that correct, Olivia? 14 in favor then? Okay, 14 in favor.
where are we, Madam Corporate Secretary?
We have, we had Miss Director Smith in favor, so 14 in favor and 12 opposed.
Hear what she said.
Oh, sorry, Chair Gillis. So we have 14 in favor and 12 opposed.
So the motion passes.
Correct.
Thank you. That takes us to recommendation number 2. Or does that obviate the necessity for? It does, doesn't it? Yeah, okay, thank you. That brings us to zoning amendment bylaw 2781. With respect to the Crown leased parcel, there are 2 recommendations. I'm sorry, Director Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, on a point of order, the motion was to not deny it, and it didn't pass. So do we not have to deal with 1 and 2? It did pass. Oh,
We're okay? Okay, there are 2 recommendations with respect to bylaw number 2781. Don't everybody talk at once. Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. That brings us to bylaw 2785, the Holloway Drive.
I'll second that.
Oh, sorry, we have to do both recommend, yeah, right, all right. Recommendation number 2? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That also is carried. That brings us to 785. There are two recommendations. Is there any discussion? Director Stammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To staff, in the report, talks about that this went through the Tobiano Design Review Committee and there was recommended construction changes. What were those construction changes?
So Regina here, if I may, I wouldn't know specifically. They would be of an aesthetic nature, not building code.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Recommendation number 2. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay, delegations and invited presentations. And we have 8.1 building infraction stop work order 801 Loon Lake Road, Electoral Area E, Larry Weeb. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to that?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Sorry?
Nope. I wanted to just take a look at the room to see if anyone was here, but I hadn't heard that anyone wanted to address the board on this, so no.
Thank you. So that brings us to unfinished business. The same building infraction, there is a recommendation. Any discussion? There's no discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. That which brings us to bylaw 2748, Highway 97, Electoral Area I, and it says most of Electoral Area E. I think there's a correction to be made there. Is there not, Madam Corporate Secretary?
That's correct. It should just be electoral area I.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. We have electoral areas M and N, fire protection service area amendment. There are 3 recommendations. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Is there any discussion? Again, I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Moved and seconded. And is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. That takes us to the Green Lake Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 2792. One, okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Development applications, development variance permit application, DVP 106 for Peavine Road, Faben BBC.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That takes us to reports, and we have our CAO's verbal report to start with.
Thank you, Chair Gillis, and good afternoon, Board of Directors. I just have a brief update to share today. Firstly, the inaugural meeting is fast approaching, and I just wanted to make sure that people knew that we did have a change. This date is now being moved to November 17th, as the city of Kamloops was not available on the originally planned date of November 10th. Our staff were unaware of a previous Remembrance Day dinner that occurs every year with the city. So that being said, the inaugural meeting for the TNRD is November 17th from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and it's at the Sandman Hotel. So not the Sandman Center, but the Sandman Hotel. More information will be coming, but I just simply wanted to share that with the board. As for the elections, upcoming election, we had the opportunity to update the electoral area directors today at the EA committee meeting. We shared all voting locations throughout the TNRD and the ways residents can vote. It was very well received. That is also being publicly communicated as well. Mail ballot requests have been brisk, and we anticipate more to come in. It's hard to believe we're only 23 days away from this election and in the closing of this term, as Chair Gillis mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. I would like to wish our outgoing board directors all the best in their retirement, and good luck to all those board directors seeking re-election. I'm certainly looking forward to getting started with our new board and working in the plenty of work that we have ahead of us. Switching gears to UBCM, I had the opportunity to be at UBCM last week, and I considered it a very successful conference. Had a chance to connect and meet with a lot of CAOs, a lot of other municipalities, regional districts. We had 4 very successful meetings, with 3 with ministers, 1 with provincial staff, that I thought went really well. So it was a good experience and wanted to share that with the group. And then finally, as Chair Gillis also mentioned in his opening comments, where we've got 2 meetings left balance of this term, one being the October 6th meeting, as well as the committee of the whole meeting on October 7th. Staff have been doing our best to ensure we're wrapping up priorities and initiatives that are important to this board of directors. I will be providing a high-level overview of our strategic plan and a status report on our BDO recommendations at the upcoming meeting. Given that we're only 2 weeks from that meeting and the agenda coming out, it's an extremely tight turnaround for agenda items, because I know our legislative team is very busy right now working on the upcoming election. So that's all I had, Chair Gillis, for today, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Director Rothenberger, then Director Quinn.
Just a question about those of us who won't be around for the next term. At what point are we out? Is it election day? Is it the declaration of official results, or is it the swearing in of the new directors? And I say this because of the now quite a lengthy gap between election day and the inaugural, and things are going to come up before, in between.
Totally fair question, and I'll let Ms. Campbell respond if I'm wrong. But I know that I believe right up to the inaugural swearing in is when you would continue to have responsibility for your directorship.
Okay, Director Quinn.
Actually, Director Rothenberg asked my question, so does that mean that we're sort of called a lame duck board? Are we called a lame duck board in that time?
Mr. Hildebrand?
Thank you.
You can call whatever you'd like, but yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any meetings then until the new board's sworn in after those 2 meetings.
Thank you, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Just on the committee of the whole on October 7th, I just wondered why we're having a committee of the whole, which would go in the next board in terms of the sort of information that would be kind of decided there. It seems to me like some of us are very busy right now doing various things. So if it's really important to have that meeting, or whether we could, put that off in the next board's kind of hands.
Yeah, a fair question, Director Singh. I know that it's a topic that did come up with this board, and it's mostly for information only. There's no decisions being made in that meeting, but it was something that was requested to happen prior to the end of the term.
Okay, Director Rain, Director Roden, and then Director Rothenberger.
Yeah, I just have a question on the election. Several people in Area P have said to me that there's limited hours for voting. And I was under the understanding that there are prescribed voting hours. And the issue they were raising is that it was, I think, late afternoon, evening, and some people certainly in this area work evenings too. But is there limited hours for
Ms.
electoral
Campbell?
areas?
Through the chair to Director Rain, so we have a number of polling locations that are open in area P on voting day that are open the required hours, so 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. However, we have additional polls that we're not required to have. They're pop-up, what we call pop-up polls in electoral area P, and those are not open for the full 12 hours because they're in areas that it just doesn't make sense for us to staff for 12 hours. So there are polling locations that are open for the 12 hours, and then those that are open for a shorter period of time.
Yeah, thank you. And a supplementary question. Is there not a prescribed period in which you have to have the inaugural meeting? Is that still, does that date still meet it?
That date does meet it, yes. We can't have it any earlier than the Monday following, no, the Monday after November 1st, after an election. So it does meet the requirements.
Yeah.
We would have preferred to have it earlier, but as this board knows, we have run into significant beyond our control scheduling challenges, especially trying to accommodate all of our member municipalities being at this inaugural, which is really important. So.
Thank you, Director Roden.
Thank you. There are two educational meetings, for lack of a better word, one for TNRD newly elected officials and one for newly elected officials throughout the region. Are there not? Do we have dates for those?
So that hasn't changed. So Friday, November 4th, I always want to say 3rd. We do have a regional orientation session. So that includes all of our member municipalities, including all of their counselors, even those who are not on the TNRD board. And then we have a TNRD specific orientation session scheduled for Wednesday, November 16th, the day before the inaugural. And that should be in the most recent board calendar.
Thank you, Director Rothenberger.
I was just going to provide an example for Director Singh of why we should go ahead with the committee of the whole meeting. I'll do that anyway, Director Singh. I've been asking for discussion on minimum lot size regulations for several months now, and this is the first opportunity that there was room on an agenda to have it. So if that meeting was put off, I wouldn't be able to speak to that. So I understand your point, but I think we need to deal with the agenda items that have come up.
Thank you. Is there, oh, Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we've changed those dates. Traditionally, people have not been paid to go to inaugural, but to get expenses. And there's now a meeting on November 4th and again on the 16th. So how do those people get paid for those if they're not sworn in yet? And if
So sorry, what was your question, Director Quinn? Can you repeat that?
the inaugural is on the 17th. Our bylaws say that we pay expenses for the inaugural and then we start moving into their regular pay. But if we have meetings on the 4th and the 16th, as you described, how do we handle that for those new incoming directors? And do you need a motion to pay at least expenses for those?
So I'm not going to get into the details because we worked this out. So myself and payroll and finance met on this. So the incoming directors will be compensated the meeting stipend for attending the board orientation sessions, because that's in the remuneration bylaw. And then their indemnity, their annual indemnity will begin when they take office, which was when they're sworn in on November 17th. So we feel we've got it. Hopefully we've got it covered.
Thank you. I think that covers everything arising from our CAO's verbal report. So that brings us to 12.1.2, the approval of discretionary grants and aid from electoral areas. There are two recommendations.
Move recommendation 1. But I think it'd be 1 to both of them, right? I'll move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded is, I'm sorry, there's only one recommendation, 2 phases.
Yeah,
to it.
2
I see.
phases,
Yeah,
that's right.
sorry,
Sorry.
Director Kershaw. Has moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? Carried. Canada Community Building Fund for Electoral Area I, the Spences Bridge Volunteer Society building roof repairs. Is there any discussion? I'm seeing none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. The Canada Community Building Fund electoral areas M and N for funding for the Merit Curling Club roof replacement. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And Canada Community Building Fund electoral area M, Waterworks Improvement District water meter installation. There's a recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? I see none. It's carried. The Emergency Preparedness Fund.
So moved.
The recommendations moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Local government infrastructure planning grant for electoral area I, community water storage design study for Wallachine, I think it was it not? Yeah. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. We have 70-mile fire service funding, and there's a report from the general manager of operations. It's moved. Seconded. I understand that Mr. Vieira is prepared to speak on that if necessary, but I can call the question. Is there?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you might be happy with that. I see no other discussion on this matter. So all in favor? Opposed, if any? You're carried. I was given notes that Mr. Vieira would be prepared to speak. I somehow get the feeling that he's uttered a sigh of relief when he didn't have to speak. Appointments to the Agriculture Advisory Commission.
Second.
Seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. That brings us to committees, EA directors, Director Kershaw.
Had a meeting this morning and recommendations will be probably coming to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Emergency Management Protective Services. I thought that was disbanded, Ms. Campbell.
It has been, Chair Gillis, but there was a recommendation coming out of that committee that was missed on a previous agenda. So just, yeah. I did.
So there is a
I'll
recommendation.
move the recommendation.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Finance Committee, Director Rain.
Yep.
Sorry, just a minute, Director Rain. I think Director Swan had a question.
Can we go back and I move the building permit activity list for information?
That's a good idea. Is there any discussion of that? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Ms. Sadilkova.
Can I just share some good news on that front? The section 57s that go to the board, of course, they go to the board. Those can't be done by staff, but the releases of the notices from title is routinely done by staff. And I just wanted to let you know, partly because of the very hopping, busy real estate market, we have released over a dozen notices from a title as people have fixed their issues and their building permits.
Thank you so much for that. So I think we went back before we voted on the recommendation regarding the Emergency Management and Protective Services Committee, the recommendation coming from an earlier meeting. Is there any discussion of that recommendation? And I'm seeing none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That brought us to the Finance Committee. Director Rain.
Yeah,
Your
I
turn
would
now.
move that the board receive the minutes of the August 24th meeting. And those are final minutes.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Thank you. There is also a recommendation
Yep.
with,
Yeah, I would move that we receive the terms of reference as recommended by the audit committee.
moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on those terms of reference? Director Brown.
I would like to ask why we don't have operations involved in our finance committee. And we're talking, again, only the responsibility for external audit, but we were also looking at internal audit. So where is the reporting for our internal audit in our finance committee?
I don't know if one of the committee members would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I can,
Chair Rain?
it certainly was discussed and there was a recommendation that, and I'm sorry, I apologize if we left it out, but there was a recommendation that we make recommendations on the internal audit procedure.
So can we
We can certainly add
approve that
that
as amended?
add it as amended for the terms of reference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. That takes us to Policy and Governance Committee, Director Roden.
Thank you. This committee met yesterday. There will be a report and a recommendation forthcoming.
Thank you. External Committees, Fraser Basin Council, Director Rice.
There'll be a meeting on October 12th, 13th of the entire board in Vancouver, and receive the minutes, the September 13th meeting.
Thank you. Municipal Finance Authority, Director Brown.
Mr. Chair, I believe there's a typo.
Oh, okay.
on
Yeah.
the Agenda that I'm the director and Director Brown is the alternate. So that reverted from however long that was a couple of years ago. We had a very short meeting at UBCM to do some mandatory approvals that needed to be done. That being said, there was conversation that they're expecting approximately about a 75% turnover coming up after the election on the authority. And so there'll be big change there. And at which point, if I am reelected, I plan on running for Finance Authority for this board, but as well at that point, I'd like to go to the executive of the committee if reelected. Thank you.
Thanks, Director O'Reilly.
Mr. Chair, we might have missed the vote on the receiving the Fraser Basin Council minutes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say again?
We did. We missed the vote on this. You're receiving the minutes.
The receiving of the minutes of the September 13th, I'm sorry. Okay, that's moved, is it? And seconded? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Emergency Management, we got Municipal Insurance Association Director duty. On what? I think we did, yeah. We did.
Okay, so you're not going to believe this because all year long I've been complaining about the fact that I wanted to present something as far as the Municipal Insurance Association goes, and guess who didn't go to UBCM or the LIA? So I'm going to have to defer to Director Roden on this because she did it in my stead.
I felt so bad when I got the email because I'm stealing his moment of thunder he's been building up to all year. I'm so sorry, Director Judy. Yes, the MIABC did have their AGM at Whistler. It was a very quiet, very quick affair. There is a new board member for Silga. I'm sorry, I can't remember the lady's name, extremely well qualified. And that's about it from MIABC.
Thank you. Shuswap Watershed Council Director Crow.
Yes, Director Christian and I attended our last meeting of the Shuswap Watershed Council yesterday. The next intake for their water quality grant program is in November. There'll be up to $55,000 in grant funds available. Watercraft inspection stations in BC here were reduced from 12 to 6. The Watershed Council is asking that the province restore the other 6 stations, as 10 mussel-fouled watercraft were intercepted and 60 decontamination orders were issued. A letter is also being sent to Interior Health by the council asking them that before they issue an algal bloom caution, that they do testing to confirm that it is algae and there is a risk and not something else like possibly pollen, as we were told yesterday, and to be available to provide updates instead of issuing a caution affecting all of Shuswap Lakes. They need to focus it down into the actual area where the algal bloom is, if there is one. That's a big concern to all of the tourism operators out there, that if it's just put on the entire Shuswap Lake, the impact on tourism is quite significant. So that's my report.
Thanks, Director Crow. Kamloops Airport Authority Director Roden.
Thank you very much. We had a meeting earlier this month. There was talk about the increase in traffic. It is increased more than was predicted, but I think they're still looking at 2024 before we return fully to pre-pandemic air traffic levels. Work is continuing on the major infrastructure project for this year, which is new lights for the runway. Still struggling to find a viable concession operator out there, and there was discussion about the airport improvement fee. Next meeting is in December.
Thank you. FCM Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. The FCM board did meet in Strathcona, Alberta. A lot of us went to Whistler, so I didn't attend that meeting, so I'll have a report back when those minutes of that board meeting are made available for consumption by a wider audience. If I could talk about UBCM for 1 second, one troubling stat, one thing I find relatively hopeful. I ran into Todd Pugh from Civic Info at UBCM, and he said normally there's about 200 or 300 people across the province who are running for local government positions. This year it's about 2,800. So we're down a bunch of people who are running as candidates this year, which is sort of an interesting stat, but troubling, I think, in my mind. The second thing was that Chair Gillis, yourself, and CEO Hellenderbat attended a meeting of real district chairs and staff about the Emergency Program Act review. There's a committee that I've been co-chairing with the province for a number of years, and there are some desires, and Mr. Vieira was at a meeting actually before on Zoom before UBCM about real district specific concerns around Emergency Program Act. So the notion of funding, capacity, the notion of big regional rural areas that have these massive emergencies happening more and more now, and how we sort of work with those. The good part is that the legislation is being delayed again because of COVID. Wildfire seasons now, they're trying to make sure they have the Indigenous co-creation piece done up pretty strongly. So there's a piece for us, there's a time for us to actually really incorporate those concerns. I met with UBCM staff after that meeting we had at UBCM, the informal one with RD chairs, and certainly that message has been heard by us at the sort of UBCM committee level, and also by the province. There may be a time where we say we don't like the legislation, but hopefully we can get it through with regional concerns very well at its center. So I just want to make that quick comment about that meeting, and I want to say thanks to yourself and Mr. Hellenderbat, Mr. Vieira for their input. It's a critically important piece of work that we're working through a process, been at it for a long time, and we've almost landed it, but it's really good to have this pause now to talk about our RD specific concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Singh. That takes us to Community Energy Association Director Blackwell.
Yes, I met with the group at UBCM for social. I'd like to congratulate Barrier and Director Samer on their electric car charging station project. I don't know the status of that right now. And on another note, I was also elected to the UBCM board, so I look forward to representing for the next calendar year, barring election disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. I intend to charge forward on this until we get to the closed meeting portion, because we have to take a break at that point anytime. Anyway, so there is no notice of motion. Which brings us to new business from members. Does anyone have new business? Director Rothenberger to start with.
My last item, I promise, Mr. Chair. There was an item, a news article in Infotel News a few days ago about a terminally ill cancer patient who was evicted from an RV that had been parked on a relative's property. And it was a confusing story, because unless you're very careful reading it, you would think it was the TNRD that had done this, but in fact, it was on city property near the Kamloops Golf Course. So I have a kind of a two-pronged question. One is to our staff. Just briefly, what is the current status of enforcement on the bylaw? Because as you recall, Mr. Chair, I think 3 years ago now, we relaxed our enforcement somewhat on a case-by-case basis for temporary use in certain situations. And the second part of my question would be to city directors as to what their view is of the enforcement of their bylaw in these tight housing times, and whether they're going to continue to enforce it no matter what the individual circumstances.
I can answer the second
Ms.
question.
Zadulkova, I think, would probably be the one to answer that first portion of your question.
I'm trying to, through the chair, if I may, I will try to be as brief as possible, because this is not a short question. We act on complaint. I don't know how long the RV in the city has been there, and I believe we did reply to that reporter, and they knew from us that it was not in the TNRD. But in the TNRD, you will note that you've had several temporary use permit applications and approvals for RVs up to 3 years. So we enforce on complaint. Typically, the RV would have been there for years. And so it's not a question of somebody visiting and staying in an RV for a week, a month, or even 2 months. The amount of, I'm trying to recall our stats, because we get more or less the same number of complaints on RV living every year, and it's anywhere around 6 to 8. Does that give you enough of a summary?
Director Rothenberger.
So hypothetically, if you received a complaint about a terminally ill cancer patient staying in an RV on somebody else's property in order to access medical care close by, is it likely that we would enforce the bylaw in that case?
We're not as fast as all that. We only have one bylaw enforcement officer. And we have this year, I don't know what's happened, or even since COVID, our complaint load has really increased. We certainly wouldn't kick them out. However, I believe that property is in the ALR, so the ALC also has an enforcement officer. I don't know the history of that property, or in the TNRD where the ALC becomes involved. In a case like that, we would confirm what the site servicing is, like is the unit set up with water and appropriate septic? And if it is, we would invite them to apply for a temporary use permit.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess my concern is that we still retain some flexibility in enforcement, because that was the intention, I think, of our discussion some time back. So I think you've reassured me somewhat. Thank you.
Yeah, we do. We have a special half-page section on RVs in the board bylaw enforcement. And that is what we follow in the board policy on bylaw enforcement. Sorry.
Thank you.
So on your second question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, the complaint, it was complaint driven. It had nothing to do with the man who had terminal cancer. It had everything to do with 6 to 10 RVs that were there that were dumping sewage into the river. And IHA was involved as well. Our CSOs started working with the people there in early June to assist them in stopping to pollute the river and to move out. They went so far as to call other parks to see if they could relocate there. And many did, but there were some people who just did not want to leave, and that was one of them. But no one knew at the time that the CSOs went over there that there was a man with cancer. This was all about the river and the sewage. They had improvised some sort of system for all of the RVs.
Director Rothenberger.
So the city would not have enforced strictly on the if the situation was as presented in the news article.
I can't speak for CSOs on that. Perhaps the mayor can, but I just know the situation there because when I read the story, I knew that it was completely wrong.
The media got it wrong. The media got it wrong.
I left the media, so yeah, they get it wrong now.
I'm shocked. Director Walsh.
Yeah, yesterday, even though the agenda doesn't show me on the policy and governance committee, but I was there yesterday. We had a conversation about the potential that we might be getting another council member, going from 26 to 27 members, even though we're packed house right now.
That's correct. But I thought we were. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. This is
my question is
this is a fresh new business issue, right?
New business.
Thank you.
So I just wonder, does the board have to ask staff to apply for an amendment to change the legislation that requires, because we're at 6.025 and you must round up to 7 according to the legislation. Unless the city council directs the staff not to fill the position, we have that option apparently, as long as we can explain to the electorate why we're not going to exercise that extra position. But we already have unanimous voting, right? We have a weighted voting already with 6 people. So, but there is a technicality with Ms. Campbell would be able to explain it with the BC legislation. So, but we could defer it for a year by just not filling that position and allowing the system to work through and hopefully change the legislation to something more common sense.
But I would think that would be a decision of the city, whether or not they defer it.
Well, yeah, that would be a decision, but do we have to direct staff to even make to propose an amendment to the BC government? Or do they do that on their
Ms.
behalf?
Campbell?
Through the chair to Director Walsh. So you're correct. As it stands right now with the census update, the city of Kamloops will be required to appoint 7 of its council members to the TNRD board. We have reached out to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs to find out what our options are. And if we could, it would require amending our letters patent to not have the appointment of a 7th director. The process involved in that is extremely extensive and lengthy. It would require First Nations consultation. And so our plan would be as staff to bring a report to the board with all of this information and what will be involved to determine if the board would like us to look into amending our letters patent. In the meantime, we asked the ministry if we could hold off on appointing or if the city could hold off on appointing a 7th member. And their response was that's a decision of the city of Kamloops council. So the city of Kamloops is required in the legislation to appoint their allocated members. And if they choose not to appoint a seventh member, then as Director Walsh pointed out, they would be required to explain to their electorate why they aren't sending their full complement of representatives to the TNRD board. So the longer process of amending the letters patent is something that couldn't be decided today. It would be something that staff would prepare a report for and would most likely go to the next board. It would go to the next board.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Director Walsh? Thank you. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, congratulations to Director Blackwell on being a director at large. And just for clarification, those two level 2 charging stations were actually partially funded with the TNRD from Area O Director Kershaw. So thunder to him as well. So thanks very much for that. They should be on board here pretty quick.
Thank you. Director Schaefer.
I received a letter on my email concerning Loon Lake and Pressy Lake about the RVs, that we sent a letter to them to tell them that they are parking illegally. I'd like to know if that's true or not. And was it a complaint or was it just the TNRD doing it?
Ms. Campbell, are you able to address that?
I may let Ms. Adilkova speak.
Ms.
However,
Adil-
we shouldn't be talking about bylaw enforcement matters in an open meeting. So perhaps we can raise that at another time, or you can come speak to staff and we can answer that question.
Thank you. Director Watson. Oh. There you go. I was told to add your name to the list. Is there any other new business from members? I see none. Question period takes us to question period. Is there anyone in the public gallery who wish to advance any questions to the board? I see none. That takes us to closed meeting. I'll entertain a motion to move into closed.
Second.
Thank you. We will recess now for about 15 minutes until 3:30.